This is a first for me. My guest is the pastor of a condo complex in Calgary, Alberta. And when you hear Marie Grabek's story, you might not be surprised. Marie, welcome. I was going to say welcome back, but really we connected in Calgary with our first Full Circle Regional Conference this past year. Good to see you again.
Great to be here, Maura.
And really your story starts where you were born.
Yes,
Saskatchewan.
it does. Yes, how about that, eh?
Yeah.
A little town called Eston, Saskatchewan.
No, Eston.
Yes, quite a few people are familiar with it. There's a Bible college there, actually. But my journey began, I had a grandmother who came into a personal relationship with the Lord when she was in her 40s. And that began to trickle down, and she was a praying grandma for all us kids. And though we're maybe a little slow getting back in there, I really believe that we're there because of her.
Isn't that wonderful?
And yeah, so I had a faith as a young girl, had accepted the Lord very young, but hadn't really grown in the things of God, hadn't gotten grounded in God yet. And so you tend to live your life then the way you always have. And then I made some choices in my life that caused a dramatic change. I became pregnant at the age of 16. Of course, in those days, it was not very favorable. I left school, moved to Calgary, lived with my sister here. But I always like to tell a quote, Maura, that I heard Ruth Graham say once when it comes to people who think they are an illegitimate child. She says, "There are no such things as illegitimate children, only illegitimate acts." And so may that release a listener today that maybe has struggled with that and felt they weren't significant because they were conceived outside of wedlock. But that changed things. I then had to leave school, couldn't go on to college, couldn't do all the fun things that, you know, people like to look forward to in going to college. And so that all changed for me. Then I met my husband. Kelly would have been about 7 months old when I met Roman. And we got married. I was only 19 and Roman was 21. And not knowing the journey, you know, that's where when you're not grounded in the things of God, you sometimes aren't aware of the pathway that you may choose that could cause certain events in your life. But I know God is always in control, isn't he, Maura, of our lives, as long as we keep trusting him.
Things got pretty rocky here.
Yeah, they did.
Married
It got
life.
tough. My husband became an alcoholic fairly early into our relationship. He would have never intended to, and I always like to encourage young people when it comes to alcohol. An alcoholic never wants to become one, but it starts somewhere, and you know, we have to learn and know how to deal with the issues in our life so that we don't go to substances to help to fulfill those things. But it was definitely a trying time in our home, in our relationship. But God is the God of second chances, and God is a God who restores. And it was quite amazing because when I came back to the Lord, I was 27. My daughter had been being picked up by a Sunday school bus. And it's so neat how God just tends to orchestrate and begin to move you back because he never lets you go.
And in this case, that wonderful verse, "A little child shall lead them."
Yes.
I think Kelly,
yes,
your firstborn,
yes,
going on that bus to Sunday school,
yes,
it brought a connection that would ultimately call you back to the foundation you grew up with.
Absolutely it did. And I had a sister who had recommitted her life just shortly before. It was kind of a ripple effect in my family. I had one brother who never strayed away, but the rest of us took our little journeys off track, but God brought us back on. And so I recommitted my life at the age of 27. And you know, when you go through hurts and trials and struggles in your life, and I too would have felt like I had lost significance in my life or value because of the things that I'd walked through, I dove myself into the things of God and got involved in Bible studies. And I love to encourage people to get into the Word. Because when the Word gets into you, it changes you. It helps you. It encourages you. It strengthens you. Helps you to remember scriptures when you need them when you're down. And I did that. I got into Kay Arthur Bible Studies, and you know her, boy.
Precept.
Yeah, it was homework 5 hours a week. It was, but it was really, really good for me. Of course, it would have had its effects in the home too. You know, in later years, when you talk to your children, you realize that, you know, to Kelly, she probably felt like, you know, the church owned my mom, and I lost my mom to the church, and because we're all searching for that place of belonging, aren't we? But God again continues because of his great love to bring restoration and healing into our lives.
How did this work with an alcoholic husband?
Well, I tried to be careful. I would encourage wives, don't post scriptures all over the house or all that kind of stuff. God was very good at exposing me to some areas in ministry that showed me that there was an enemy of our soul. And he began to teach me how to separate Roman from the alcohol to the value of Roman as an individual life. So I could pray against the work the enemy was doing in his life and still love him. And later on he said to me, he said it used to drive him nuts because, you know, he'd be expecting a certain reaction and that wasn't how I would react to him.
You loved him.
Yes.
Through this.
Well, I knew he didn't want to do what he did. I knew he didn't want to become what he had become. I knew there was so much good there in him. There was such a value, and only God can show us that in an individual and be able to help you to see that individual for the value he is.
So you hate the sin and not the sinner.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then as I was doing Bible study with Kay Arthur again, we were studying a passage, and this was a very difficult passage for me, in 1 Corinthians 5, when it talks about loosing an individual over to the enemy so that his soul might be saved in the end, to destroy the flesh. And I thought, oh my goodness, God, it's hell now. What would it be like if I did that? And then as you go on in the passage, it talks about us not associating with people that are drunkards and all those other things. And I said, well, Lord, that's kind of hard. I'm married to this one. You know, how do I walk away?
If this is a believer, that passage is about people in the church.
Yes, exactly. And so anyway, Roman had become a Christian 4 years after I did. He had accepted the Lord, but unfortunately his drinking didn't get better. It got worse initially. And that's because of all the things that we often each make mistakes in our lives. And we find it so hard to forgive ourselves, even though we know God forgives us. And I think that played a very big part in why he then seemed to struggle even greater with the alcohol. But God, again, wanting to bring restoration to us as individuals and to our home, then I just went to bed that night and I was lying beside Roman and I was kind of crying and saying, you know, Lord, that's such a difficult situation. That passage tells us of what we need to do, and God, I want to do what's right. And then I heard the Lord say to me, just whisper, just a thought, Marie, are you willing to pay the price no matter what the cost? And that again was when I said, oh God, it's hell now. What would it be like if I loosed him over? But Lord, I want to do your will. I want to be obedient to you, Lord. And so I said, yes, Lord, I will. And that following Wednesday, this was a Monday night, and then that following Wednesday morning, a pastor of mine who had been counseling Roman and counseling him with his drinking, and had told him not to worry about the alcohol, that we'd deal with that later. God rebuked him that morning when he was praying about it and told him that he was not counseling Roman correctly. And he needed to tell Roman. And this was very harsh, and God doesn't deal with everyone this way. But we're all unique, and God knows what we will need because he knows our personalities. And the pastor said God had told him that he was to tell Roman that if he ever took another drink, he would take his life. Now, whether that meant spiritually, yes, or physically, only God knows that. But Roman had wisdom. He said he was angry when the pastor told him. When he phoned him at work, he said, Roman, I want to talk to you. I feel the Lord's told me something. So on the way over to the church that day after work, Roman picked up a 26 of whiskey to have his little security blanket with him. And when he went in and the pastor shared this with him, he got very, very angry. But he said, I knew it was God. And he said, he got so angry at the pastor. He said, at one point, Marie, I felt like hitting him. You know, if you knew Roman, you'd know why that would come out of him. But anyway, the pastor finally said, well, do you want me to pray for you or not, Roman? And he said, yes, I do. So the pastor took authority over a spirit of alcohol and addiction. And Roman walked out of that church. I can never tell the story without getting choked up because it's so miraculous. Roman walked out. He took that 26 of whiskey and he held it up and he said, God, you've got to be God because I can't do this on my own. And he poured that bottle out on the lawn of that church in Ogden, which was an area of Calgary, a little church I went to there. We went to New Life Community Church. And he poured that bottle out onto that lawn, and he never touched another drop.
No more double life.
It was amazing. Now, he was miserable at first, which I guess they would call a dry drunk. But then God once again led him to go back and to have a little bit more counseling and forgive his dad for some things. And then Roman lived 16 years sober.
Let's look at some pictures. Put a face to Roman. This is actually, I think, your 25th?
No, that was way before our 25th.
Really?
That would be about 5 years before that.
Okay.
That one was taken just after Roman was diagnosed. This is our daughter Kelly and Roman when we went to Mexico. This was after he had been diagnosed with his cancer. That was the next thing that came into our life. This is our son Clayton that we adopted when he was 11 days old. And that was his grade 12 graduation, which was a real answer to prayer for Roman. And a trip to Disneyland with the grandkids.